Hey guys, what's up? It's investigating your favorite TV shows, and today I'm going to do a review on Lost Season 5. So, yeah, Lost is a TV show created by Damon Lindelof, J.J. Abrams, and Jeffrey Lieber. It's a show about how the airplane Oceanic Flight 815 crashed onto an island and the passengers had to survive. And because there was so much that happened in between seasons 1 to 4, and I don't want to waste hours of my time explaining everything, I'm just going to repeat what I said in the season 4 review. This island is not just any island. It's really strange. There are polar bears, smoke monsters, century-old ships, hidden bases, hidden villages with sonic traps, and I'm only scratching the surface. I haven't even mentioned the cursed sequence of numbers, the electromagnetism, the invisible mystery entity, and the secret powers this island gives, as well as the 3 or 4 groups of people who landed onto this apparently non-existent island many years before the airplane did. So if you haven't watched seasons 1 to 4, I don't recommend you to watch this review because it's too far gone, man. It's too complicated. You're going to be extremely confused at this point. So, season 1 of Lost is near flawless in my opinion. It is packed with mysteries, yet it feels grounded. But this show is the kind of show that gets more and more complicated and strange regardless of the quality of the story. Season 2 is a bit slower as it explores the others and is actually more interesting. Season 3 explores more about the others, the Dharma Initiative before the others, and the rescuers that came after 815, as well as more Desmond who came after the others, I think. And season 4 digs deeper into the rabbit hole as it mostly shows flash forwards instead of flashbacks. We constantly jump forward to what happened to the Oceanic Six after they escaped, including Jack, Kate, Hurley, Saeed, Sun, and Claire's son Aaron, left the island by being rescued by Desmond's wife, Penny, but actually Desmond also went along with them but didn't want to be exposed to all the press, so it's actually 7, Oceanic 7. At the same time, because Ben had to obey the invisible supernatural entity of the island known as Jacob, Jacob ordered Ben to turn the wheel in a Dharma Initiative station, the Orchid, which set the entire island off time and space, making the people on the island constantly jump to the past and then to the future and over and over and over and over again. Basically, the people on the island had been accidentally time traveling every 30 minutes or so to a random spot in the timeline. Also, I guess the show Lost is applied with the assumption that the past cannot be changed, so everyone stayed on one timeline. No new timelines are created in this season. So we have episode 1, Because You Left. And it started off very interestingly. Again, the time traveling, it's one of the strangest things to ever happen to a portion of a group of characters in a TV show. But we also jump to 3 years later, so imagine you've been time traveling unintentionally for every half an hour, every day for a period of time. That would be very frustrating. Ben somehow ended up in the USA and found Jack, and convinced him to return to the island. At that point, Saeed and Hurley were on the run as some people were trying to kill them. People are beginning to question the relationship between Kate and Aaron, as Kate wasn't really her biological mother, but really there's one person behind this, I'm sure. Sun wanted to return to LA but was stopped by Ben's number one enemy, Charles Whitmore, aka Desmond's dad. Both of them also wanted to kill Ben. On the island, immediately after the Orchid wheel was turned, John, who was just elected as the leader of the others, was separated from the rest of the group and encountered people like Ethan, who supposedly was already dead in season 1, got shot by him, jumped back far to the future, and met future Richard, who of course didn't age because he's immortal. Future Richard knew about all this and he patched John up and then told John to show past Richard his own compass to convince that John would be from the future. Then, to make it more confusing, Daniel, who's also in the same predicament, came up with an idea to help stop the time jumping, and that is to get Desmond's help. So he spoke to Desmond from the past, before the 8:15 plane crash, and told Desmond to go to Oxford University and find Daniel's mom in present day. Desmond then woke up 3 years later, and apparently it became a dream to him, and now he had to go to Oxford University. 3 years after Daniel told him this, and probably 9 or 10 years after he was told this by Daniel, and goddamn, I just love how confusing and strange this is. I love TV shows that make you think. Episode 2 is titled The Lie, and lies and deceptions are huge themes on this episode. 3 years after the escape from the island, Saeed was unconscious because someone shot an anesthetic dart at him, and throughout the entire episode, Hurley was trying to protect him. He decided to go to his dad's place and then ask his dad to see Jack, basically. And since Jack was with Ben, Ben went to get Hurley, and Hurley freaked out and did a huge oopsie. Very unwise decision. Meanwhile, Kate and Aaron were still on the run. They met Sun, and Kate sort of explained the situation she's in. On the island part, not much had happened. There are a few scenes where a few characters tried to start a fire. Miles somehow communicated with a dead pig. The Neil guy is incredibly annoying, and then all of a sudden some fire arrows started shooting at them, and some of them died, but no one of importance. Then Sawyer and Juliet ran into some British military and got saved. And when I was watching this, I thought maybe the British military was from the future. Maybe Charles Whitmore somehow got hold of the island ultimately at the end, but I was actually wrong. They were actually from 1954. There really wasn't much happening on this episode. However, I do really like the duality of the situations and the flash forwards. We really don't know if we should trust Ben or not. Yes, he's an evil, calculated person, but he's also trying to prevent something terrible from happening as well. On episode 3, Jughead, the story picks up its pace and becomes really interesting again. Apparently the British military thing, it's from the past, and it's from the year 1954. Soon after the others conquered the Dharma Initiative, I think. Or actually no, because in 1954 it is Richard and the British military, but the Dharma Initiative was not, they didn't know anything about this. Either that or the Dharma Initiative didn't even begin yet. And because later on in the story in 1977, the Dharma Initiative was still there. Anyways, Daniel, Charlotte, and Miles were captured and brought to the camp, while at the same time John found the camp and tried to talk to Richard, who obviously didn't recognize John because John wasn't even born yet. So it gets really interesting. I also like how we see the connection between the others and Charles Whitmore, and maybe a reason to why Charles Whitmore and Ben Linus hate each other so much. Then we have the flash forwards where Desmond had to go find Daniel's mother because his mother would know how to stop the people on the island from jumping back and forth in time. And so Desmond returned to the UK, and that's dangerous because Charles Whitmore is in the UK, and Charles Whitmore being Desmond's father-in-law, who is also evil, calculated, and murderous. It's very dangerous. And what Desmond did was really brave, and apparently Daniel's mother is in Los Angeles, so Desmond had to go all the way to the USA for that. So overall, I love this episode. It's not the most mind-blowing or climactic, but every scene is pretty interesting. I also really love the connections in this episode. The compass that Richard gave John was actually given by John himself 50 years ago for Richard, but also like a few hours later for John. So who made the compass? Who owned the compass originally? No one knows. Then we have episode 4, The Little Princess, and it's just alright. It's mildly interesting. Back on the island where the time kept flashing, apparently they jumped from 1954 to back in season 1 when Kate was helping Claire deliver her baby. When they all jumped to another time where it's the future, the camp is all ruined and some canoes showed up and they were hunted by some other people. Then they jump back to the past when Danielle Rousseau and her team of Frenchmen crashed onto this island. And it's a pretty interesting series of jumps, and I'm quite happy to see Danielle again. There's also another twist. Apparently a certain character is alive, and that's pretty nice. 3 years later, in the flash forwards, Jack managed to get Kate, and now they're all together in Los Angeles, but of course a lot of confusion is happening because they didn't want to return to the island, of course, other than Jack. So overall, just an okay episode. There wasn't much progression. I do, however, like how the episode title references to a very important childhood novel, though. Next is episode 5, This Place is Death. And it's another really interesting and eventful episode, in my opinion. What's special about this episode is that it has so many time jumps in just a span of a couple minutes. I had counted 6 time jumps in this episode. Jin's return is really satisfying, and the way the story is able to somehow let us learn about Danielle's past without using flashbacks are actually pretty smart. We sort of see how Danielle landed on this island, and on another jump we see how she thought everyone around her had turned sick and insane, which had ruined her life. Then we have 5 more continuous jumps, and this had caused even more people to have nosebleeds, and the situation had gotten so much more intense. Locke finally found a way to enter into the orchid, and Jacob showed up and helped him turn the wheel. So that's very exciting, but it also it really piques my interest. How will things turn out? How did everything go down? 3 years later, everyone, including Kate and Sayid, basically ran off and left Jack and Ben alone, refusing to return. Sun stayed because she wanted proof that Jin was alive, and Ben said Jin was alive. And then Sun, Ben, and Jack arrived at the church to find Ben's leader. And then Desmond showed up, and what I love about this situation is that I kind of don't want them to return to the island because they can actually live a life outside of the island, but will they sacrifice themselves to save those people who are on the island? There's no exact right or wrong decision at this point. Over to episode 6, 316, which is entirely about the Oceanic Six returning to the island. Minor spoiler alert, but yes, they are returning to the island. And there are so many questions I want to ask after watching this episode. In the beginning, we see Miss Hawking sort of explaining how to return to the island, and I guess I was a little bit underwhelmed by how exposition-y her character was, but other than that, this episode remains to be quite interesting and exciting. If I were any of them, I would have definitely refused to return to the island. It's a suicide mission. The real world is so much bigger and have so much more to explore, and again, it's a suicide mission. Why would I want to go back? We weren't given clear reasons as to why Sayid and Hurley also agreed at the end, but I'm just really happy Desmond didn't return because he really deserves a better life after spending years on the island pressing a button. Episode 7, The Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham, is another one of those episodes that completely center on one character. Like that episode centered on Mike after he left the island, now we have one for John Locke, basically. And it's fairly interesting to see how he tried to persuade everyone to come back. I still kind of don't see why Jack was convinced by John at the end, and I still wanted to know why Matthew, played by Lance Reddick, was working for Charles Widmore, or how and why did he know someone's fate. I like the 2 plot twists at the end of the episode, how John Locke died and how he wasn't exactly dead. And apparently some other people also ended up on the island after the 316 plane crash, and one of them I recognize is the same guy who played the villain in Touch Season 2. He was also in Wonder Woman and John Wick. Episode 8, LaFleur, is an episode completely about what happened to Sawyer, Juliet, Charlie, Miles, and Jin after John Locke had left. And it's another fairly entertaining episode. Not all that interesting, but it answers quite a few questions. We constantly jump from right after John left to what happened 3 years later. And basically what happened was that they joined the Dharma Initiative and had been living there for 3 years because it was 1974. I find it strange how the writers made one more time flash before the final time flash, where we briefly see a giant stone statue of an Egyptian god, which may be somehow involved in the whole origin story of the island and Jacob. That also raised another question. If they are traveling back and forth in time constantly, why haven't they traveled far into the future, like 3000, or maybe far into the past, like a few thousand BC? Why are they always traveling in time within the same century? Not really sure why, but I guess it's so that things can happen and are related to the overall plot. Overall, I counted 15 time jumps. Maybe there are more, but yeah, 15. Then we have episode 9, Namaste, and it's another really solid episode. Fairly entertaining, not much else. There isn't any huge revelation or huge plot development, and it's basically Jack, Kate, and Hurley entering their new lives by joining the Dharma Initiative. At the same time, we have the Saeed situation, and that's a bit more tricky because Saeed, for some reason, showed up in another location near the flame, and he's considered as a hostile, aka the others. So Sawyer had to somehow save him. Another thing I love is how this show makes a lot of connections, like how Ethan is born is related to Juliet, or how Richard had seen John before in the 1950s, or how Ben had already seen Saeed before. Seeing Jack speak to the guy in the Orient films is a crazy thing to believe in, but here we are. We also see a couple of Smalltalk scenes between Jack and Sawyer, and then Kate and Juliet, so overall it's okay. It's pretty good, okay? Same applies for episode 10, He's Our You, where it's basically a Saeed episode. The ending scene was kind of shocking in that I don't know how will that scene lead into the future because it just doesn't seem possible. But that's pretty much the episode. We also see some of Sun, Frank, and Ben, but it appears that they're either in the present day in 2007 or they're somewhere else in time. Either way, definitely after 1977. That's interesting, but I just hope that this can be dealt with because I feel like Sun's group finding Sawyer's group isn't really as important of a storyline. Over to episode 11, Whatever Happened, Happened. And it's another pretty solid episode that I enjoyed. This episode answers so many questions that we asked in previous seasons, like why did Ben take Danielle's daughter Alex? Why did Ben and Charles Whitmore have beef? How did Charles Whitmore live a life where he always goes back and forth from the UK to the island? And also how Ben joined the others. The only one thing that needs connecting is how did young Ben see Richard in long hair in that one flashback? What happened there? I know that's before they conquered the Dharmas, right? Anyways, we basically have a complication of Saeed's actions last episode, so we see Kate and Julia trying to save young Ben basically, which is something you'd never expect to hear when you're still watching season 3 or before. So overall, another pretty okay episode, nothing all that mind-blowing, just interesting information. Episode 12, Dead is Dead, is similar to all the previous episodes, except it's a little bit more interesting and memorable. Like, slightly. First of all, we see Ben still being super manipulative and being a pathological liar, and the 316 survivors becoming more and more paranoid as they think they are others on the island. There are others on the island. Meanwhile, we have Sun, Ben, and the other person you know who basically ending up on the main island and trying to figure out how to time travel to 30 years ago. But what I love about this episode is how Ben decided to have the island judge his own actions by finding the smoke monster himself and embracing his own fate. And even though Ben is a villain, he also has layers. He also has personality, and seeing him struggle humanizes him, and it's great character writing. One thing though, when the episode started, it used a different shot of Ben waking up then at the end of the previous episode. Episode 13, Some Like It Hoth, is a character-centric episode pretty much about Miles. And while Miles is, in my opinion, one of the more interesting characters of Lost, I don't think this episode is one of the stronger episodes of the season. But it still has its great moments, even though the show had already explored similar themes already multiple times, which is father-son relationships. I still low-key want to see Miles reconciled with his father, which is a really cool connection. We also see some secret missions going on in the Dharma Initiative because Dr. Chang was running some really dangerous experiments in the orchid that caused lives. Miles was told to move dead bodies, but since he's able to speak to the dead, he was about to figure out what's going on. Episode 14, The Variable, is actually a highlight of the season, one of my favorite episodes of the entire season. Danielle Faraday returns to the island and finds Miles and Jack and Kate and all of them basically. And even though 3 years ago Danielle said no matter what happens, no matter what anyone does, they cannot change the future. The future, it's set. But is it though? Danielle has a different theory now, and that is they can indeed change the future by stopping an accident or an incident that leads to the design of the button in the hatch, aka the Swan, which leads to Desmond failing to push the button, which leads to Oceanic 815 crashing, which leads to the freighter going to the island to find Ben, and all this will not happen. Are you still following me? It's a ridiculous idea in my opinion, because I believe it's either they succeed and they're still stuck on their original timeline, or if the timeline is always constant, then everything they do will not affect the future. But the final scene was shocking. There was a character death scene that I did not anticipate at all. Chaos also broke loose in the Dharmaville, or the barracks, and the plot getting more and more interesting. We also get more character connection reveals, and I absolutely love that. The third to last episode is episode 15, Follow the Leader, and it is another pretty solid episode that provides the right amount of plot and the right amount of information. I guess what makes this episode more compelling is that it tells both storylines at the same time, the present day and 1977. So we see John and Sun and Ben with the others in the future, while at the same time we see the chaos happening at the Dharma Initiative. Then, in the 1977 Dharma Initiative storyline, we see even more storylines with Jack and Kate secretly sneaking out to find the others, with Daniel's idea of changing the future by blowing up a hydrogen bomb at the Swan. And then at the same time, we have the Dharma staff themselves suspecting Ann, Sawyer, and Juliet, and while at the same time, Miles, Hurley, and Jin try to escape. And all at the same time, an accident will happen 6 hours later where the electromagnetic energy will somehow explode and it's going to kill a lot of people. So the island needs to be evacuated. So that's why Jack wanted to stop that from happening by detonating the hydrogen bomb, which was Daniel's idea. I love how terrible of a situation this is. You've traveled back in time, and if you stayed on the island, you'll probably get killed. But if you leave the island, you won't get the chance to go back to the present day. Everyone's basically doomed at this point. Even in the present day, I don't know what people are trying to do. It appears that John is the only person that knows what to do. Then we have the finale episodes, the incidents, parts 1 and 2. And as always with Lost season's finales, these episodes are excellent, excellent, excellent. In these 2 episodes, there are still 2 ongoing present days, one in 1977 and one in 2007. In these 2 present days, there are 2 storylines, so all combined 4 storylines. Now, of course, I'll get into spoilers very soon, but let me just say that, wow. These 2 episodes completely blew me away once again. The writers managed to pack all the interesting stuff in these episodes, and now all 4 of the storylines are interesting. The 2007 storyline is the more mystical, biblical, fantastical storyline, where we finally get to understand more about the island's history, its true origins, even dating before the Dharmas. We see Jacob and his enemy, and we also see how in 2007 a huge war will occur between Jacob and his enemy, and we kind of don't notice that precursor of that war until we slowly piece the puzzles together and finally understand the shocking truth. For the 1977 storyline, it's the more technical and the more active storyline. Jack and Sayid also agreed to try to change the future by doing something extremely dangerous. And at first, Sawyer and Kate had disagreements, but they all joined in at the end, and we had one hell of a climactic ending full of twists and turns. I love the fact that whenever we see them fail a bit, we're like, oh, so you cannot change the future. Whatever happened, happened. But when they start to actually succeed, we're like, oh, maybe there's a chance. Maybe it's possible to change the future. And I just love how it constantly makes us question that. And overall, I'd say there are tons of suspenseful moments, just moments that feel like a very dangerous situation, but it's riddled with mystery and uncertainty, and that's what I absolutely love about Lost. Anyways, spoiler alert. If you haven't watched Season 5, skip. Timestamp in the description. Let's go. Let's talk about the 2007 storyline first. We finally see Jacob, and he's just a normal dude. He's just a regular dude. And I really love that. He's not some gigantic titan. He's not some 200-year-old Morgan Freeman. He's just a regular dude. And apparently he played Alex's dad in 13 Reasons Why. Who would have known? And we also see his enemy, who's played by the guy who shows up as a recurring character in Touch Season 1. And he's also actually the embodiment of the Smoke Monster, who's actually not the good guy because the Smoke Monster killed Mr. Echo and killed the French people without any rhyme or reason whatsoever. So John Locke, who wasn't actually John Locke, but the smoke monster in John's body, tried to kill Jacob as revenge. And it actually happened. Jacob actually died. This was shocking. Jacob was the master of the island. How the hell could he die? Maybe he did die, and it's sort of like Jesus being crucified, except he wouldn't resurrect because maybe he had seen his own death and he knew it had to happen. I also really enjoy seeing Ben in such a position where he knows so little, where he's the one being manipulated, where he's the one feeling lost and confused. Anyways, to 1977, Saeed was shot and dying. Jack and Saeed was rescued by Miles, Jin, and Hurley, and they agreed to head over to the Swan and blow the entire island up with a hydrogen bomb. To change the future, of course. Then on the sub, Kate convinced Juliet and Sawyer to go back to the island and stop Jack, except at the end they all changed their minds and decided to help Jack. I know that this whole bit felt kinda unnecessary, but this still brought some tension on the first part of the finale, which I kinda like. The ending though, goddamn. Jack threw the bomb down and it didn't detonate, it didn't explode. So this all had to happen, right? Desmond presses the button, Oceanic 815 crashes, everything happens again, but actually, after Juliet fell into the hole in the Swan, she detonated the bomb and actually made it blow up. So, what next? The whole island is gone and all of our favorite characters are dead. They all wake up and realize they've arrived in Los Angeles. Realistically, they would just be dead. They wouldn't jump to another timeline and live in that timeline instead, but really, who knows? Overall, Lost Season 5 is where the plot really thickens. It gets so much more complicated and interesting. But I also have to admit, this may be the weakest season yet. While the plot is, I think, the most interesting, the time traveling, the character connections, and the mysterious entities are certainly super duper interesting. But my issue is that this season just didn't quite live up to the level of entertainment like the previous seasons. And I'm not talking about, fights, shootouts, chases. I'm talking about character progression and the feeling of suspense and urgency and tension. For the most part of this season, everything felt directionless, meaning that the characters don't really have a plan or a goal. Even if they do, it doesn't feel as important. From seasons 1 to 4, it's always been, I want to leave the island, I want to survive. Plus these questions like, who are the others? Who are the Dharmas? Who's on the fighters? But the kind of questions we ask on this season is basically very blurry, unclear, and hazy. Like, is this character actually dead? Is changing the future possible? What time it is? What year it is? Where is this person? Where is that person? There are pretty much no filler episodes, and a majority of the episodes are pretty solid, but only a few of them have interesting revelations or, more importantly, scenes with tension and suspense. But still, I find this season enjoyable, and I also have many thoughts and theories. My favorite is the finale, and my least favorite is episode 2, The Lie. I am saying Lost Season 5 is mind-blowing, and I'm giving it a strong 7 to a light 8 out of 10. So, if you watched Lost Season 5, from 1 to 10, how much is rated? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. Man, I am 4 pages.